It's epic time! And for those following along at home, we have been commencing a huge project to build a gaming board and 2 armies for Legions Imperialis. The main focal area for this board has been this Kremlin-style paint job of a huge range of Legions Imperialis terrain and a scratch-built centerpiece project, which was this Auxilla square. But as part of this joint project, we also have to paint and build armies.
So you've already seen Dave's Alpha Legion, now it's my turn to paint the other half, the Solar Auxilia. I want to paint them up, come up with a color scheme and show you how I approach doing that, applying it to a new army, and we'll have a bit of fun.
It's tabletop time?
It's tabletop time. I have so much plastic to deal with right here. This isn't even half of the infantry. Now, color schemes are always what I think of first when I'm thinking of an army and doing themes. It's the most important part of the hobby to me, so I like to give it a proper amount of thought. Something that people don't always think of, particularly if you're going to split a box with a friend. What colors will make your army look good next to theirs? And so I know that Dave is painting Alpha Legion in a very shiny purple color, so I decided to go with something that will be very far from his theme and style. I'm going to go for a very matte appearance, focusing on blues, oranges, and neutral grays. And then what I'm going to do is swap up the combination of each of these colors for every unit, tank, vehicle, and I'll take you through each of those stages as I work on them. The most important thing is just to get stuck in and start gluing some parts together, because I've got a lot of plastic to wade through, and I'm getting very excited to do it. So I'm not gonna lie, planting the little minis on the bases might be some of the fiddliest stuff. Just the fact that they're so darn small. Now I've found that I vastly prefer painting everything on the base at once rather than painting the models separately, which I've seen plenty of people do, and I've even attempted it, but I do prefer this way, having it as a cohesive whole. Even if that means it's a bit bloody hard to get to the gun barrel of the guy at the back. Time to do another 17.
Meanwhile.
So earlier on, we had shown how we were going to lay out the board, but when building these boards, there's a little bit of tedious work, I guess, that needs to be done. And a tip for you at home. Foam damages easily and it doesn't make for a very good base plate. So what we like to do is glue on MDF sheets onto the base. Like so. Both plywood and MDF can be prone to warping though, so it's careful to be aware of that and look at the wood. This can be especially prevalent once you apply glues and paints, as they dry and basically put moisture in the wood, but then also bend it as it dries and contracts. Not sure on the science, but that's basically what happens. So my tip is, while weight is always a concession, on a thin board such as this, I've actually gone for 6mm thick MDF, because the thicker it is, the less small amounts of glue and things like that will actually warp it. So I'm just going to glue these on the base, clamp them down, and give them a good day to dry before we keep going. So yeah, let's do it. So one of the problems you can also run into when gluing foam onto boards is what you glue it with. Super glue will melt the foam, as will spray-on adhesives, and PVA glue has a really unique problem. PVA is used extensively in the hobby community, and by and large, it's a great glue. However, PVA only dries if it's in contact with the atmosphere. And what this means is if you try and glue a foam sheet onto a board like this with PVA, what will happen is all the PVA around the edges will glue, and then all of that PVA in the middle will never dry. Like, it literally won't. I've had this happen, peeled off a piece of foam 2 years after I'd glued it down, and the PVA was still wet in that airtight seal in the middle. This of course means it's not properly bonded. We go with a Instant Nails construction adhesive, which works well for bonding foam to pretty much anything. The other thing you'll note with these kinds of construction materials is they're never cut to size, so don't expect to get a perfectly fitting piece of foam, the perfectly fitting bit of MDF, even if the dimensions on the packet are exactly the same. In fact, the foam that we had, we already knew would be about 1.5 inches over size, so we're going to trim that down later. But for now, it's time to make sure this glue's right with some clamps. But to prevent the clamps from damaging the foam when I tighten them, I'm going to put some MDF down just to spread out the surface area of that pressure and reduce the impact on the foam. These are just random scrap bits. It really doesn't matter what bits they are. And I'll clamp these down all the same way so that I can balance them on the ends of the clamps later. I'll even add a couple more clamps in the middle as well. So that's set to drying, and it's going to take about a day or two, but with this project we want to give it the time it needs. But this isn't the only long-term project we're working on. We've got a couple more we haven't even shared with you. That's right, as we fulfill and deliver our Space Bears Kickstarter, we're planning some more things, and we have an entire range of very exciting fantasy miniatures with a special theme coming out. And I'll give you a tiny sneak preview. These amazing miniatures have been sculpted by Fleshcraft Studios, and as friends of the channel, they have a Kickstarter coming out right about now that I wanted to talk to you about. And that is called The Rise of Carneos. It's really cool to be able to share small creators out there and all the cool projects they're doing. This is a self-contained 5th edition campaign, as well as a full-length novel introducing you to the city of Cairnsvale. The monstrous hordes of Chiron, the god of flesh, are besieging the city, attempting to summon forth an avatar of a great god, Carneos, the messiah of flesh. These amazing miniatures that we're showing will be available as STL downloads as an add-on for this campaign, but the center of the campaign focuses on 2 hardcover books. We have a deep dive sandbox crawl style adventure focusing on gore, horror, or the forlorn hope of victory as you journey through the lands trying to survive the carnage. And something really cool and unique is the second book, which is a full novel, straddling the line between horror and dark fantasy, as well as revealing the full blood-curdling story behind the rise of the children of Chiron. So we hope you like blood and guts, because this campaign doesn't pull punches, and if you'd like to support a small creator who is supporting us and making some really cool stuff with us in the future, please go and check out Fleshcraft Studios. The campaign has a pre-sign up page. Go sign up and get notified when there's more to see. We've already shown off some cool stuff. Fleshcraft makes some really great stuff. So we got boards drying, previews given, but let's get back to Murray painting his tiny Auxilla.
Alright, so for my painting example, I'm going to do my senior command squad because it's got the most details and the most variety, so it makes sense to show you that. And then afterwards, I'll go through all the squads and how I differentiated those, changed up all the color patterns, and just to make them all unique so I can look at them and immediately be able to work out which weapon that these units are using. Because you don't want to be stooping over a battlefield and trying to work out, oh, if they got the bigger guns or the little guns. You just want to be able to recognize immediately upon color which unit they are. Now, the first stage to painting everything in my army is going to be a solid base coat all over using Citadel's The Fang. This gives a really nice murky grey that I love to use for neutral undertones. Also, it's going to be the colour for the stone I'm going to use for the bases. Now, the first thing I'm going to do when I pick up the brush is establish where all the armour panels are on each little individual figure. And this will be quite laborious and time consuming until you get a real flow and hang of where all the panels are. As I feel not a lot of people are familiar with painting Solar Auxilia in any scale. Once I'm happy with a few clean coats of Rakarth flesh on the armour and also on the body of the banner here, I'm going to move on to the next colour of the armour. And for this, I decided to go with the blue. One, because it looks cool, and it potentially also allows me to use them as an auxiliary force for my 30k Ultramarine. Just having that nice bit of blue to tie both forces together really adds a nice bit of narrative. But by the same token, I can have them separate for the Ultramarines and sort of use these guys as nondescript forces that I can use narratively anywhere that the Ultramarines aren't in the setting, as 30k is quite narrative driven. Now the next stage is a little bit special, and that's just because this is the senior command squad. I'm going to paint the cape of my commander and also the edging of the banner using a really nice strong dark red. This is probably the only time in the army this color is going to appear, and that's just so this unit stands out. I wanted to look extra special and regal, but once I've done that, I'm going to move on to all the metals. I'm just going to block out anything metallic using lead belcher, and then brass scorpion is my choice for the gold. It's a nice off color that will really come to life later. Now once you've allowed all that to dry and glued the sword back on because you broke it because it's a little bit fragile and you're a bit clumsy, it's time to give each of the models on the base a wash of Nuln Oil, trying to make sure not to get any on the base. Once the Nuln Oil is completely dry, it's time to go back in and just reapply the original base colors just as highlights this time. This will give a nice sharp pop of color. I'll do this from a zenithal position as this will give this nice appearance of light hitting the miniature. To make my brass pop, I'm going to use Auric Armor Gold from Citadel, which will give this really, really nice vibrant highlight. The final touches will be a very light dry brush of gray over the base, just picking out all the nice textures on the molded bases. To be just a little bit extra special, I'm going to apply a transfer onto the banner, and since this faction is sort of my own creation, I'm just going to invent a faction insignia just by basically combining a couple of existing transfers together. Then I'll go in freehand and just scribble down some supposed exploits that my legion has clearly done at some point in time. Alright, gonna be honest, threading the paintbrush between the arms of two models and painting text on the banner behind might be one of the fiddliest things I've ever done.
That was a script error on behalf of that servitor. He was promptly executed.
Last thing, of course, is to give a nice trim of black to the rim of the base. I have finished the senior command squad, which I'm really happy with. That turned out really well. I wasn't sure how I'd go with painting like the tiny little lenses on everyone, but I think it turned out really well. I like completely highlighted them with like, you know, the standard gem effect with the orange and the dot of white. That was ridiculously fiddly. Just as an example, I also have line infantry sergeant squad, junior command squad. And you can see here that I've made the banner for that one blue as opposed to this red that we use to signify just the senior command squad. And then I also have veteran troops. These have got the flamethrowers, so I made sure that I used a lot of the brassy gold to pick out all the weapons. But also for the slightly different armor configuration on the heavier troops, I made sure to further emphasize how much armor they have. I decided to lean heavier on the gray color and didn't actually paint their heads blue. So you ended up with this very uniform, almost like scuba diver looking effect, which I think really works out for them. So essentially within the same three colors, I'm just leaning on the emphasis or ratios between all the different armor panels and such. But what still ties them all together is that orange stripe, that crest on their head. You can tell that they're all still very much a part of the same force. That and of course the basing is all the same. But now I've finished the infantry, it's time to do something that I've been looking forward to all this time. Tanks. It's these tanks and different vehicles that really excite me about Imperialis. They are just so cool, so detailed. I think they actually out-detail the regular 28mm scale things, and they are so well designed, they just go together so nicely. They're so cool. And I get to build and paint a Malcador. When else was I going to do that? That's awesome. And you get a couple of little Warhound Titans, which again, look even better than I think the Forge World models. There's just so much more extra detail and they're just a little bit more refined in some of the proportions and details. It's awesome to see. And I'm going to have something just a little bit special towards the end of this video, so stay tuned for that one. So basically, look forward to seeing me build and paint a lot of little tanks.
Alright, we're good to go. Thanks.
I love painting tanks because you can treat them pretty much just like you would painting terrain, which is to scuffle about with the paintbrush and just be really messy because you'll add all this texture and variance which will make the end result look awesome. That even applies to tiny little tanks. So the first thing I'm going to do is water down a very dark green color. I've chosen Stegodon Scale Green here, and I'm just going to meander about the miniature with my brush, effectively stippling and lining all the recesses. I'm going to do this pretty much at random, as this is to emulate oil streaks and all sorts of other grime that is just built up around, as well as just irregular parts of the metal. And since the water is fairly watered down, it's going to be quite a subtle effect, so I don't have to worry too much about blending, but the end result will still show through. Then when that's done, I'm going to start dry brushing, starting with Warpfiend Grey, which is more of a purple grey, and then going in with a lighter dry brush of a Rust Grey, which will pick out all the really nice sharp edges. Then I'm going to go just a little bit wild and water down a contrast paint. I've chosen Frostheart from Citadel, but you could pick pretty much any contrast paint you wanted, and I'm effectively going to use this as a glaze, just to tint the existing colours and bring a bit of vibrance into it. Now what I definitely don't want to do is to use this as a contrast, letting it pool in the recesses like a wash. So I'm going to apply this fairly lightly, but if I see it pooling anywhere, I'm just going to go in with a brush and just wipe it away there. Once that's dry, it's time to start on all the details, namely everything that's going to be metal. So I'm going to use a black to block out all of the tracks, gun parts, and basically any exterior gubbins that's protruding out of the armor that isn't an armor panel. Now let these sit for a while as I want all the contrast paint to be completely dry, and just to really bring back the strong, sharp, crisp highlights, I'm going to use another dry brush of Rust Grey, very lightly and just towards the tops of all the panels, and then we can move on to actually painting all the metal. Now I'm just going to overbrush most of this metal, as it gives me the most control and leaves all the nice black in the recesses. However, if you make any mistakes here, you can always just put a bit of Nuln Oil over some areas, if you just need it to tone it down a bit. The next part is something just a little bit special about the Solar Auxilia, and that is the amount of really really cool gold trim on all the vehicles. So just as I did with all the infantry, I'm going to start with brass scorpion, but here I'm going to differ a little bit and use a brown ink or contrast to shade all the metal afterwards. This is really going to saturate the metal and give it this really deep luster. It's a good idea to take time with this step, as you will invariably find even more trim just moving along the arm panels. And now with that done, I'm going to start revisiting some of the color palette that I used for the infantry, namely the greys and oranges. So I'm going to grab Rakarth Flesh, and I'm going to use this to accent some of the cannons, just with some nice designs. I always like the motif of cutting off the front half of the hull. This is something I learned for 40k tanks, mainly the Lehman Russes there, as you can have these really cool pops of color, and using ribbons of color within it to denote squads or specializations. So I'll paint the Rakarth Flesh on an angle for the Malkador, really leaning into just how angled the tracks are in this tank, whereas for the Lehman Russ, I'm going to go for a straight vertical line. I'll do all this using an overbrush technique again, just so I keep some of that nice grey in the recesses. Then I'll come in with an orange color. I mixed my own using Evil Sun Scarlet and Yokoro Orange, and I'm going to apply a stripe of color somewhere within the grey panels now, settling upon a parallel line down the Malkador, as well as down the top of the hull, and then for the Lehman Russ, I just split the panel in half. I'll further highlight any edges, and then it's time to touch up any little extra details about the tanks. I'll make a nice strong brown wash for the fuel tank on the back of the Malkador, paint any exposed crew members sticking out of the cupolas, paint in a couple of kill tally marks, and of course all the little targeting lenses. And just by doing variances of this is how I can paint all of the vehicles in my army, including sentinels, as well as one extra very special thing that I couldn't help myself that you will see at the end of the reveals.
Oh, and while this was all happening, Games Workshop seemed to have teased plastic 28mm Solar Auxilla for Heresy. So, egg on Murray in the comments to do his army at full 28mm scale, and yeah, that could be something fun to look at in the future. I can't wait to see the reveals. Maybe at the Nova Open, who knows?
A huge thank you to all of our patrons. It is you that allow us to create such awesome content. We think it's awesome. I hope you think it's awesome. Patreon is the best way to support us and what we do. And if you'd like to support us, the links are in the description below. It gives you access to updates and also to our patron tier Discord channels, which allows you to see even more behind the scenes, updates, tidbits, dev blogs, and even access to our monthly mini review in which you can enter your submissions, whether they be finished pieces or works in progress, and you get to have us chat about them, give feedback, and even some harsh critique if you so desire. So again, the links are in the description, and we hope to see you there.
Outro. Murray, now everyone has seen you. Everyone's seen you do that dance. It was on camera. Editor played the dance.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mambo number 5.
And secondly, Murray, everyone has now seen that you have a complete, fully painted, complete finished infantry and everything starter box worth of Legions Imperialis.
Yes. Everything is done.
Neither of us have finished our infantry. Both of us have the same opinion, right? The tanks are really fun, the infantry become really tedious. Like, very tedious.
I don't know if it's just the way I chose to paint my Solar Auxilia, just like doing all the different details and all the different materials, but it takes a bloody long time.
Yeah, it's not my favorite thing. I think I'll snap out the 2 boxes worth of base infantry and then like never paint infantry again. I don't care if it's good or not, but I'll just do vehicles because they're fun.
Just get the minimum required so you can add the big things.
Well, speaking of adding big things, that's our armies. You've seen how we're painting them, but I think it's time we do some Titans. In an upcoming video, in not too long, Tiny Titans. Let's do it. So if you want to see how we paint and create, are you creating a new Legio? I'm creating a new Legio.
We'll find out in the next episode.
Let's do it. So stay tuned, like and subscribe. The playlist is up there for our epic series that we're doing. And yeah, we're having fun. So I hope you are too. See you in the next one.
Go check out the town square. It's really cool. Repeat that one a few times. This is my revenge.
I'm not ashamed of loving the viewer.